So I just played Assassin's Creed Mirage for the first time. As a long-term fan of the series, I was really excited when I heard that Mirage was returning to the roots of the Assassin's Creed franchise, which is something people have been asking for a very long time. However, the game did not seem to be received very well at all. Emerging as one of the lowest rated games in the franchise, players and reviewers criticised the game for having simple, repetitive gameplay loops that didn't live up to the original games, alongside some clunky combat, a short, uninspired story, and of course, bugs.
What?
However, one of the biggest complaints about Mirage is that it felt more like a DLC for Valhalla than a game in its own right. So after seeing all this criticism, I, like many others, just didn't pick up this game. But now, 2 years later, I gave Mirage a true shot, exploring everything the game had to offer and reaching 100% completion. And yes, that does include every collectible and every Enigma location. But during this, I made an active effort to ignore the criticism I heard about the game, and looked to answer the question myself of, did Assassin's Creed Mirage deserve the hate? The first step in this deep dive into Mirage starts where all good playthroughs do, at the difficulty settings. I really considered carefully the difficulty I wanted to use, weighing up the pros and cons of the impact it might have to stealth, combat, and I just picked Master Assassin. I like difficulty, I like a challenge in games, although I don't know if Mirage really satisfied this. The game starts off with a young Basim, who you may remember as a main character in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Mirage explores his journey in Baghdad during his rise through the ranks of the Hidden Ones, starting out as a young thief in the streets of Anbar. And whilst doing some small tasks for his employer Dervis on behalf of the Hidden Ones, Basim longs for purpose and desperately wants to join this secret group of freedom fighters that he admires so much. And he therefore decides to steal an important chest that Roshan, the head of the Hidden Ones at this time, is looking for, to not only prove his loyalty, but ultimately his ability to join the Hidden Ones. And this involves sneaking into the palace with his friend Nehal to steal the chest that is being delivered to the Khalifa. And this is where we, alongside Basim, are introduced to the Order of the Ancients, as 5 masked individuals threaten the Khalifa, ensuring that he keeps the chest well secured. Not really realising the impact of this, Basim still attempts to steal the contents of the chest, which reveal it to be an ancient Isu artifact, which, oddly enough, Basim can activate. Probably because he's actually Loki, the legendary Aesir from the Norse branch of the Isu, which makes sense. And this culminates in Basim and Nehal having to kill the Khalifa, who catches them before they're able to flee from the palace. This first prologue mission actually gives you a really good initial taste into what the gameplay loop looks like for Mirage, carefully planning your approach in different restricted areas, identifying different opportunities that can help you, and eventually having to run around like a madman using parkour and hiding spots to escape capture from the guards. Whilst Basim may have been able to escape the wrath of the Khalifa's guards in this moment, his friends in Anbar weren't so lucky. As Basim sees the wake of destruction he's caused, the reality of the situation sets in, and he gets mad at Nehal, blaming her for what has happened. Eventually Basim is forced to flee Anbar, which is where he's picked up by Roshan, who helps him escape, and takes him to Alamut, the hideout of the Hidden Ones. Alamut then serves as your classic training tutorial, where you're introduced to different parkour mechanics, combat features, and some of the characters that you'll encounter throughout the story. You do progress quite quickly through Basim's training, almost like a time lapse, until he finally gets to join the Hidden Ones and make his oaths.
Basim ibn Ishaq, you now follow in the Eagle's path.
All in all, I think the prologue and tutorial did a good job at introducing you to the basic mechanics of the game, and gave you a solid idea of what you can expect from the next 20 to 30 hours of gameplay. The combat didn't really click with me in the early stages of the game, although I did end up remapping some of the controls, which made this feel a little bit better. However, it was hard not to see that it would become a very repetitive format of just parries, dodges, light attacks, and heavy attacks, which personally I didn't use that much anyway. Regardless though, you could already tell at this stage of the game that it wasn't designed to be focused on hand-to-hand combat like the RPG installments have been, and actually trying to pursue this path and force combat too much would lead to some less than ideal outcomes.
What? Just fight! Shit! God grants me strength! Die! You're doomed!
The thing that really stuck with me throughout the early introduction of the game was how reminiscent Basim's journey felt of other protagonists in the AC franchise. Having to go through and learn the basics of what it means to be an assassin from the ground up felt a lot like when you were back in AC1 and Altair was stripped of his assassin rank and had to get used to all the tools and mechanics again, or like Connor in AC3 where you're learning to be an assassin from a very young age. I think they did a really good job at capturing this connection with the traditional games, and I personally felt quite connected to Basim's story, the struggles he faced back in Anbar, and his desire to find purpose within the Hidden Ones. And honestly, this gave me a lot of hope of how the rest of the story was going to play out. Before we can really evaluate the story though, we actually have to jump into the main game, which take Basim and other members of the Hidden Ones to the city of Baghdad, where we're tasked with rooting out the Order of the Ancients and liberating the people. It's an Assassin's Creed game. What else do you expect from the basic story? And that journey starts in the region of Harbiyah, where Roshan wants you to meet with the Hidden Ones Bureau to discuss the first steps of the plan. On my way there though, I got distracted.
I would like to look around first, if I may. Baghdad and its surroundings called to me.
So something you need to know about me is I love a good collectible, and world exploration is one of my favourite things in every RPG that I play. So it was probably inevitable that I was going to get sucked into the shiny gold markers, historical sites, and of course the synchronization points around the world of Mirage, which is exactly where I started my journey in Harbiyah. I went to all 4 synchronization points in this part of the map, using Enkidu, our eagle companion, to scout out the different collectible locations, and travelling to every historical site that I could find on the map. Along the way I got to find some of these lost tales of Baghdad, which served as very short side missions, where you usually just have to help someone complete a task, such as the first one where you help a priest dig up a grave, for religious reasons? These lost tales were a nice flavour of interest to break up some of the exploration, but in no way would I consider them a full-fledged side quest activity. Throughout my exploration of Harbiyah though, I did come across one particular challenge. This prison. Trying to get this one gear chest in the prison caused me so much trouble in the early game, and did show me just how important having the right stealth approach and the right tools was going to be to infiltrating these large compounds. And I didn't even properly want to get inside, I just wanted to break down this door and get the chest at the front of the prison. There was actually a point where I finally had made some headway, taking out these guards and got to the location to break the barricade, only to realise that I'd actually used all my throwing knives to get there, which meant I had to run back out of the prison, go to a shop, buy more knives, and then break back into the prison. It was not a fun time. It probably took me the best part of half an hour to actually finally get this one gear chest, although it did teach me some really important lessons about the parkour mechanics, detection systems, and how this game is not centred around combat. Despite my frustrations with this particular area, I did enjoy the world exploration of this region quite a lot, and especially the parkour mechanics. Parkour is one of the main pillars of gameplay in Assassin's Creed, and has been a much lower focus for Ubisoft since the RPG installments, so it was good to see Mirage come back to some of the more traditional parkour movements. Granted, I do believe I played on an updated patch of the game which did improve some of the parkour mechanics, but overall I did find it quite engaging, and I liked the fluidity that Basim had as he was moving around the map. You could also tell that the map was clearly designed with parkour in mind, adding different structures to make the rooftops really accessible for parkour and give you a lot of different ways that you can traverse the map. Sure, it was not as smooth as Ezio or Arno's movement in some of the older games, however, for a parkour system built on the foundations of the RPG parkour system, I think they did a good job at developing this into something that felt a bit more meaningful. And as a whole, I have to say the parkour probably was one of the biggest positives of this game. The only other thing I found a little bit confusing during my exploration of Harbiyah were these last 2 collectibles, which I couldn't quite seem to work out what they were. However, it does turn out they were linked to side quests later on in the game, which very soon became available. In fact, I actually found one of them by mistake, the Mysterious Shard, by randomly killing this enemy. It turns out there are some Order members running around the map through preset paths, which you can kill off to find one of these mysterious shards, and they can be collected and traded in at an ancient Isu chamber for special weapons and gear that we find later on in the game. The other collectible to discover ended up being Dervish artifacts, and these were the bane of my existence. By following the main quest of Harbiyah, you discover that Dervish is still alive and working with the Hidden Ones, completing different tasks. And he will give you access to this side quest to steal special items from select citizens around the map, using your pickpocketing skills. But oh my, are these tough. The margin for error on these is so tight, and the first one took me 4 tries. Bearing in mind each time you fail a pickpocket you alert the person you're stealing from, and they'll then send the guards after you. So you have to go a decent way out of the way to get them to reset and lose your detection to be able to attempt this again. I did however do this one on my first try and felt pretty good about it. After then collecting everything available in Harbiyah, I continued the main quest line, which involved doing a few smaller missions to gain intelligence and clues that ultimately led to me breaking the leader of the rebellion out of, you guessed it, the prison.
No, wait.
I have to say I was not happy about being back here, but to be fair, it was a lot easier this time around. Having some prior knowledge about the layout of the prison, I was able to break him out pretty easily. Breaking him out and heading to the rebellion camp just north of Harbiyah set the final mission in motion, to assassinate Ras Al Ghul. Oh wait, never mind, just Al Ghul. I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed this mission, and actually all of the end assassination missions of each area. They give you an overview of how the missions can be approached before you start, which is a really nice touch, and helps you find opportunities that lie ahead. In this case, we had to get Al Ghul to leave his chamber somehow, to even be able to assassinate him in the first place. The focus on stealth was very apparent, requiring you to sneak through the location, take out guards in your way, complete these little opportunity objectives, and ultimately prime yourself to get the assassination on your target. I like the way this system worked, and it felt very reminiscent of the system we had in Unity, which I also really liked. It made these final missions of each area feel really impactful and strategic, like I was actually a member of the Hidden Ones trying to root out a member of the Order. I also have to say that guaranteed assassinations on all targets was a welcomed return for this game particularly. Personally, I didn't actually mind the way this was set up in the RPG installments with stealth damage, having you to level up to be able to get enough damage to one-shot assassinate, but with a game like Mirage where the progression system really isn't that advanced and is quite simple, and with a gameplay focused around being quick, getting in and out, and ultimately using parkour and stealth more than combat, I think this works, and it was a bit of a sigh of relief to not have to worry about this throughout the game. So far I was quite gripped by the story and gameplay mechanics I'd seen so far in Mirage. However, what I didn't quite know at this stage was that this gameplay loop was the exact rinse repeat throughout the entire game. And what I'd experienced so far was pretty much what I was going to experience for the next 20 hours. The end of this quest ranks Basim up to an apprentice, which has no real relevance, other than giving you a slight indication that you're ready for some of the higher level areas of the game. You do however get access to the teleporting assassination ability, which whilst it feels really out of place for an Assassin's Creed game, is pretty awesome. With some upgraded gear and abilities, I then went to explore the northern wilderness section of the map, on my way to meet Nehal in Amber. And I have to say, this is where my positive experience to Mirage hit its first hiccup. Exploring the wilderness was really a dull affair, with large amounts of open desert between actual viewpoints and collectibles. Compared to how enjoyable I found the city world design, this felt really out of place, and to be honest, I wish they'd actually just scrapped the wilderness section entirely and added a teleport system for you to go in between Amber. This would have saved on a lot of space of the map, which was ultimately just bland desert and a couple of bandit camps who were guarding some crafting materials. I also experienced quite a few hitches of the game's loading performance during this time, where my mount would be going too fast to keep up with the game, which often led to stuttering and freezing. Whilst there were definitely some instances where this was my PC that caused it, the majority of times were an actual in-game issue, as I was able to freely pan the camera around, and it was just the game stuttering instead. This really broke some of the immersion I was feeling and honestly got quite annoying at times and made me not want to explore the wilderness even more. And these weren't the only bugs that I'd come across so far in the game. There was one mission where I got stuck in a wall for apparently no reason and had to restart the whole infiltration of this dock, as well as having character models not load properly. Later on I even got to a main story mission which didn't load a cutscene properly, leaving me to run around the area of the map trying to do stuff which I actually wasn't able to do. And let me tell you, that cutscene was important. Now I do expect open world games to have some bugs and loading issues, but my problem with these ones was that they were particularly immersion breaking, taking me out of the game and leaving me kind of just stuck on what to do. I can deal with textures not loading or enemies dying and ragdolling across the map, but when I physically cannot progress through the game like I'm meant to be doing, that deserves some wider criticism in my opinion. Bearing in mind this is 2 years later on, so they've had plenty of time to implement some bug fixes and patches, so I really struggle to imagine what it would have been like at launch when this wouldn't have even been the improved experience. After a bit more exploration and starting Nehal's questline, who is the one who gives you the information about the mysterious shards and the Lost Isu chamber, I decided it was time to continue the main questline and explore the remaining 3 bureaus, Abbasiyah, Karkh and Sharqiyah. The way I approached all 3 of these next areas was really similar, so I'm just going to give you a general overview of my gameplay experience. Step 1, explore the new region, collecting everything I possibly can, and breaking into difficult areas that are tied to the main story way too early. After a few deaths and convincing myself that this is just preparing for the real attempt, I would have completed all the collectibles and be ready to start the main story in the region, unburdened by the sweet allure of shiny gold markers. Step 2 is then completing the main story in that location, walking back into those challenging restricted areas like I owned the place, or realising they were much easier than I originally thought. And step 3, explore the wilderness next to that location, which again consisted of a large amount of desert, but the viewpoints do look awesome. I have to give them that. There was actually one collectible that drove me insane in Abbasiyah. There is a chest that is locked behind a door with a key, which doesn't sound so bad if you can find the key. Using Enkidu, I found multiple keys, none of which opened this door, to the point I was sure that this had to be locked behind some sort of story mission. After a bit more exploration, I did find the person who actually had the key. Unfortunately, he was also locked behind a door which I had to break. But I'd used all my throwing knives taking out guards. After spending my money at the shops to get more throwing knives, I went back, broke through this door, and realised it wasn't actually in there, and instead it was up a staircase which I 100% could have gotten to without any of that effort. So it's safe to say this gear chest was thoroughly annoying, but hey, I got an upgrade blueprint for a dagger I don't use out of it, so all worth it. Painstaking collectibles aside, I did really enjoy these 3 different areas of the map as they all felt quite distinct with their own different themes, but still benefited from the same gameplay mechanics that I was enjoying. Abbasiyah, which was the first area I explored, is a district of scholars where the region is full of astrologists, poets, and the House of Wisdom, which is like a massive library that Basim and Nehal used to sneak into as kids. Everywhere you went and all the associated missions that were tied in with this area all matched this theme, and that was quite nice to see such consistency. Then you have Karkh, which is like the main bazaar, and again, your missions were filled with traders and merchants, and as you explored through the streets you would see different shops and stalls selling goods. This all accumulated in a final quest which involved an auction at the main bazaar during one of the biggest merchant events of the year. And then Sharqiyah was a military district where the main garrison was stationed, full of military harbours and what felt like an influx of enemies around the place. This district was heavily under construction and all the missions were focused more around defeating high-level generals working for the Order. I really did like how they matched up the theme of each area with the missions they put in it. This is something that probably gets overlooked a lot when it comes to story and narrative components, but it really helps add to the immersion when you are exploring these areas, and it was much appreciated by me. And overall, throughout playing these missions, collecting and gathering clues, helping citizens and rooting out more information about each member of the Order, I really felt myself getting sucked into each mission and the story of Assassin's Creed Mirage. Even though some of the missions were a little bit tedious, such as gathering and fetching information or tailing missions, they did add quite a lot to the main story and weren't frequent enough to take away from my overall enjoyment of the gameplay so far. After completing the last 3 bureaus in Baghdad and taking out 4 of the 5 members of the Order, I was really enjoying the main story. Throughout completing these regions and covering about 80% of the main game, I really got to test out the combat and stealth mechanics that Mirage had to offer. The stealth is definitely the focus of the gameplay, and I have to say, I really enjoyed it. I've been playing a lot of the Assassin's Creed franchise, especially in the last year or so, and the way Mirage stealth played out felt really similar to some of the older entries. Yes, the enemy detection AI in some situations felt kind of off, and yes, the multi-assassination tool took all skill out of the stealth gameplay, and yes, throwing knives are extremely overpowered, but it still felt good. There felt like genuine impact to your actions and decisions when approaching situations using stealth. There was significant importance put on using Enkidu as well as Eagle Vision to better understand your environment and plan your next steps, because if you didn't, the chance of you getting detected and having the entire place come down on you was very high. And this isn't like the RPGs where you can just fight everyone off at once with overpowered abilities. When you're taken out of stealth into combat in this game, you're very limited, and enemies will eventually overpower you. This means that avoiding detection is incredibly important, and using your tools is a great way to do this. In all admittance, I didn't actually use tools very much throughout my playthrough in the game because I put a lot of my focus on the Phantom skill tree instead, which means I didn't have access to them. However, later on in the game where I did have my noisemakers and smoke bombs, I saw how impactful these really could have been throughout the game, and would have avoided some unfortunate situations. Probably my only one real issue with the stealth mechanics in the game was the sheer amount of times that enemies spent hunting you when you were detected. This was so unnecessarily long, to the point there were some situations where I was so far away from my enemies, ready to speak to my quest contact, and they were still hunting me, not allowing me to actually progress to the next steps. I understand that it's important that there is an investigation period, so you can't just quickly reapproach a situation back in stealth. However, how long does this really have to take? I guess if you just don't get seen, then it'll be fine. But the fact this is my only real issue with the stealth mechanics in the game is a pretty good thing. I was thinking about why stealth in Mirage felt so much more impactful than it did in, say, Odyssey and Valhalla, which are some of my favourite games, but I felt like they never incorporated stealth in a meaningful way. And then I realised it's not actually because of the stealth mechanics themselves, really. It wasn't because of the damage-based assassinations in the RPGs instead of guaranteed one-shots, it was down to the combat, and how this completely overshadowed any need for stealth. And it's safe to say that Mirage does not suffer from this because the combat is really not impactful. The mechanics are a basic combination of light attacks, heavy attacks, parries and dodges, which is what I imagined from the start in the combat tutorial, with no real advancement on that except a kickback ability that you can unlock early on the Phantom tree, and the ability to roll over enemies doing an unstoppable attack. Now, I've really been in two minds about criticising the combat in Mirage. On one hand, it wasn't the focus of the gameplay, as they wanted to go back to the more traditional Assassin's Creed games which were focused on stealth instead, so they didn't have to flesh it out for it to be in this game as it wasn't a core pillar. However, on the other hand, it was just too easy. Now, if you had an entire base full of enemies come crashing down on you, then yes, it could pose a little bit of a challenge. But if it was just a handful of enemies, it was really easy to just get in a combat loop of dodge, roll over unstoppable attacks, counter, parry, and just light attacks, which really wasn't very engaging. Considering I was playing on the hardest difficulty and enemies definitely did pack a punch, I didn't feel any real threat of getting into conflict. In fact, the only real reason I wanted to avoid combat was because it was a long, drawn out, and frankly boring process. And that is what tipped me to using a more stealthy approach throughout my playthrough. Not because the combat was too hard or punishing, but because it was a much less engaging way to play the game. Take the final fight of the game for example. This was so underwhelming. Roshan did not change from the initial tutorial sparring, and you take off half her health with a throwing knife to begin the fight. I felt like this summed up the entire combat experience of the game in a short 20-second finale, which left a lot to be desired from the combat of Mirage. I truly do believe there is a way to incorporate combat into stealth-focused Assassin's Creed games in a way that does feel meaningful. I think back to games like the Ezio trilogy where I did play the majority of it in stealth, but if I did get caught, the combat still felt engaging enough and I could fight my way out using a series of different movesets. I'm honestly not sure what Mirage got so wrong with the combat experience in this game, and I think this balance of combat and stealth is something Ubisoft have been struggling with for a little while. The RPG installments didn't have enough stealth focus, and now Mirage doesn't have enough of a good combat experience. I'm expecting with the two protagonist system in Shadows that they strike a better balance between matching these two playstyles for the players, dedicating one character to each of the major pillars in the game. However, for the future of the franchise, I do think they need to find a way of incorporating both into just one protagonist, or we're going to have dual protagonists for the rest of time. With the completion of these 3 bureaus then, I finally stepped into the last area of the game, the Round City. And where did I go first? The Collectibles! Yes, I use this as an opportunity to get the remaining historical sites, gear and Dervis artifacts, with my new upgrade to pickpocketing making it easier, so take that Dervis. As well as then getting the mysterious shards, the lost pages, except for the final one which is annoyingly locked behind the final mission of the game, and the enigmas. Ah yes, enigmas. The one thing I have not mentioned yet about the world exploration and collectibles in the game are these enigmas. And I just have to say, why are these still in the game? These ambiguous clues to hidden treasures, or in this case, dyes and talismans, have been in a lot of the recent gameplay entries, and I just don't understand what the appeal is. Whilst yes, these do fulfill an 100% completionist itch that I have, and you only have to get one for the achievement within the game, I personally just don't enjoy them. I'd like to know from you guys, do you actually like these? Do you want to see them continue in the franchise, or are you like me and do you find them really annoying? In fact, you know what? It pretty much seems like what I thought. They seem to be quite tedious, annoying, and people wish they just had better rewards at the end of them, which I completely agree with. If these actually felt valuable and not just talismans and dies, I'd probably be more engaged to actually do them, and you guys seem to be thinking the same. But let me ask YouTube here as well, let me know down in the comments, what do you guys think, and maybe we can have some impact on where the game goes from now on. With all those collectibles out the way, I then went through and completed the remaining side quests of the game. I personally like to get everything story related done before the end of the main game so that all the cool gear and loot that you might collect can be used while it actually has some use. However, I have to say that the side content of this game is simply just that, gathering collectibles and returning them in for cosmetic rewards, or in the case of the issue chamber, 2 new weapons and a gear piece. I was really let down by this. Coming off the back of some really engaging side content in Odyssey and Valhalla, I expected so much more from Mirage and the type of people you could see and the deeper investment you'd get into the main story. And the game just didn't bring any of this. I personally didn't like the weapons that I found and pretty much used the same sword and dagger the entire game. The issue chamber outfit did look pretty awesome in all fairness, but this was probably the only one, and as someone who was once plagued by stasis hunters in Destiny 2 Trials of Osiris, I just couldn't bring myself to relive that through this outfit. All kidding aside, when I looked up if I'd missed any side content once I finished my playthrough, I saw a bunch of comments basically saying the same sentiment of, had we missed things, and some people even saying that the Lost Tales of Baghdad were the side content for us to explore, which they just do not compare to what I expect from side content in a game like this. It was at this moment that I started to understand why people spoke of Mirage as just a DLC for Valhalla, a window into Basim's past so you could understand the hidden ones more for Eivor to understand. And Mirage honestly would have made a great DLC if it was framed as that, because the amount of content they gave us was what I would expect from a DLC, not a main title, and especially not a main title pricing. I want to be clear that this didn't take away from my overall enjoyment of the story of the game, but just left a bitter taste in my mouth over what the side content could have been. Does this by itself qualify Mirage to be only a DLC? I'll speak a little bit more about that in my concluding thoughts, but I do understand where the sentiment is coming from after seeing this. However, it was as though they heard my doubts, because once all the collectibles had been handed in, I was able to progress through the final stages of the main story in the Round City, and wow. I loved every minute of this. Hunting down 3 potential leads of who might have been the head of the Order, and each having their own unique truth to uncover. I thought these missions were done really well and had a completely different tone to them than the rest of the game. The pressure was on, and people here were much more aware of the hidden ones in the Order of the Ancients. This patron of one of the potential suspects even telling you straight up that he knew who you were. Although he did think you were an Order member, but you get my point. The governor of Baghdad, another suspect, also was very frank with you about what his involvement had been, remaining calm and collected as he just did not care about what you may or may not have done with him. These suspects and their related missions were leagues above the grunts that we've been chasing so far to find the Order, and uncovering who the final head or member of the Order was a really engaging set of quests. This all amounted to one final siege of the Palace of the Green Dome, where we find and confront the head of the Order. Again, this was just a great mission, highlighting the stealth system in the game and requiring you to find clues and paths to get to your target with many different options available. I personally enjoyed breaking open this den of large cats to distract some of the guards, while allowing Ali and the other rebels to enter for some much needed backup. They also give us this book puzzle to get to our target, which felt a little bit out of place as puzzles have been a prominent feature throughout the game, but it was at least somewhat fun and not too challenging of a riddle. And then we got to the stage where we confront the head of the Order, and she revealed some interesting secrets about Basim that planted seeds of doubt about how the Hidden Ones were operating and what they were hiding from him. Unfortunately, she was silenced quickly by Roshan, who then threatens Basim if he continues to follow this path, which is just all around great content and storytelling, which I really enjoyed. I was completely hooked on the main story at this point, and seeing the rising tension of Basim as he struggled to understand his nightmares and find his place within the Hidden Ones suddenly come crashing down as he learns they may not be all they said to be was cinema. But like most cinema nowadays, this all came to an abrupt, confusing, and ultimately disappointing end. Determined to uncover the truth, Basim takes Nehal back to Alamut to confront the Hidden Ones and find the truth lying beneath the Great Temple. However, when they get there, the Order have been attacked and Basim must sneak back in, free his mentors, and then is able to confront the secrets of Alamut. When he gets there, he follows the surge of Isu energy and unveils a hidden chamber behind the temple, which causes Roshan to swoop in and try to stop him. One lackluster fight later, Nehal suddenly appears after getting lost earlier and helps Basim understand the truth. Now let's talk about Nehal for a moment. I've purposely not mentioned this character throughout this overview as I found her really confusing throughout the game. The relationship between these two just felt off throughout the whole game, and I didn't understand this dynamic and the push and pull that was between them. She was obsessed with these Isu artifacts they found back in the prologue, and she was always trying to get Basim to think more freely and not take things at face value. I also felt like she was just appearing in the most random places at the most random times. Like, why was she at the House of Wisdom during the Symposium mission? And why does she always seem to have such an opinion on Roshan, the Hidden Ones, Basim's Jinni, and the path that Basim was ultimately taking? And then you get to the big reveal of the game and it kind of makes sense. In the Isu chamber in Alamut, there is a familiar cage of the Aesir Norse Isu, and Nehal is shown to be in it, representing a fragment of Basim's ancestral past and ultimately being the side of Basim that is Loki. After this is shown through a series of confusing holograms and walking through shadows, Loki and Basim finally merge into one and they look out onto the new world, pledging to seek out those who once betrayed them, i.e. Odin as Eivor. That is a really brief summary of the wider lore implications that all of this was showing, but hopefully gives you a bit more clarity of what it was actually meaning. I felt like this idea was so cool and could have been fleshed out in such a better way, of Basim finding out about his Isu Loki past and ancestry, and going on a journey, taking moments maybe from the Dawn of Ragnarok DLC in Valhalla to give a wider picture for Basim, but they just didn't do any of this. This big end reveal just didn't live up to the other missions that I've been praising so far, and all the story build-up and tension that they've been doing so well just fell flat. And that just sucks because 95% of the story was so good and I really enjoyed it, and it just feels like Season 8 of Game of Thrones where you'd had greatness for so long just to be let down right at the end, and it leaves that bitter taste in your mouth. It just didn't end on that high note that it had been building up to the entire time. Before I get into my concluding thoughts on the game and bring this whole overview together to answer the question of did Mirage deserve the hate, I wanted to touch on my last few moments of the game, getting the 100% and all the achievements. I got the missable blow dart trophy back in Sharqiyah, and I even somehow took down the hardest enemy type in the game who hunt you at 3 wanted stars, the Sharqiyah, although I don't know how or when I did this. And of course I managed to pick up a lot of the story and combat related achievements along the way too. The final ones I rounded off were just some gameplay mechanics I hadn't engaged much with throughout my playthrough, like using the merchants, mercenaries or musicians. So I quickly found as many of these as I could and paid them to do absolutely nothing, to be honest. I also got the remainder of my tool upgrades by getting resources from a few contracts I had yet to complete, as well as saving up 2007 dirham. I hid some bodies in hay bales, threw a knife at this guy's horn, which was quite a funny mechanic, and sat parrying this one guard for 10 minutes because when else would you want to be in 10 minutes of prolonged combat in this game? And finally, to round off my 100%, I went and knocked over 20 of these scaffolding structures in the world, and oh my was this tedious. I just found no use for this mechanic throughout the entire game, which made the ending of this quite painful, but thankfully you can just stand next to one, load up a save, and then rinse repeat knocking this down to get the achievement, which is what I did for the last 10 or so, once I got over my ego and just wanted to be done with it. Overall, hitting the 100% and getting all the achievements for this game is not a challenging process, and it's not even particularly long. I would just recommend doing some of these things throughout your playthrough, which are quite easy to do along the way, to save you some time and tediousness at the end. So with the entire game of Mirage completed, what are my final thoughts? Did the game actually deserve all the hate it received at launch? Ultimately, I don't think it did. I enjoyed my time playing Mirage, despite that time being shorter than I would have liked. But as a fan of both the traditional Assassin's Creed games and the modern RPG installments, I do think that Mirage has its place as a main title within the AC franchise, and I certainly wish I hadn't put it off for so long. It achieved its objectives of giving us a taste of the classic games, with much more fluid parkour systems, height gain on ejects, quit and mantle systems, and less clunky transitions between buildings. It also gave a really solid stealth experience, bringing back the mission breakdown screen so you could plan your route and put an extra emphasis on tools, eagle vision, and eagle companion to execute a true hidden one playstyle. Whilst I did have some issues with enemy detection, overall it did have a good balance of letting you get away with some risky plays whilst punishing you for getting caught. Some of the new mechanics were also quite fun, even if they did feel a bit overpowered at times. The world design was one of my favourite aspects of the game, at least when within the city of Baghdad. The buildings were built perfectly for the parkour experience, and despite a similar colour palette throughout, I felt like each district was unique in its own way, with mission and objectives that properly lined up with the theme of that area. I also enjoyed the story for the most part, and whilst the ending was a big letdown, I'm not going to let this penalise my overall impressions of the story as a whole, and I'm just going to pretend that Basim never went back to Alamut. But seriously, the majority of the story was gripping, built appropriate tension, and I did genuinely feel like an Assassin's Creed novice, working my way through the ranks, hunting down order members through clues and detailed investigation. And that is ultimately what I want from an Assassin's Creed story. It was all these positive elements that made Mirage feel worth playing to me, and ultimately was a nice break from the RPG installments we've been getting over the past few years. That being said, the game is definitely not without some glaring issues that led to a lot of the hate that it received early on. Firstly, I completely understand the characterization of this as just a DLC. Whilst the main content was great, it was fairly short, and the complete lack of side activities meant I got this done 100% in around 26 hours. I do think that the overhaul of gameplay mechanics and complete difference in approach makes it distinctly different enough from Valhalla to be considered its own game, but the length is what really leads into this characterization for me. I think DLC is a little bit harsh, but it does make for some good headlines, so I understand why it's being used. I would more characterise this game as a short game with some shallow side content. The combat was a bit of a sticking point for me personally. Like I said, I found it quite boring and repetitive without much weight to it. I didn't feel too pressured not to get in combat situations, other than I just didn't want to. The stealth was engaging, whereas the combat wasn't, and I think Ubisoft need to consider how they approach this balance of combat and stealth within the franchise. Dual protagonists like in Shadows is a bit of a band-aid for a wider problem, and whilst I think this will be a good engaging system allowing us to fully explore both, Ubisoft do need to find a way of bringing them both into one character in a meaningful way. My last real complaint for the game were just the bugs, which were completely immersion breaking for me, and this is 2 years later, so I can't imagine what it was like at launch, and probably contributed a lot to the early hate the game received. I think game studios need to be a little bit more aware of how early launches and bugs impact their game's initial impressions, and especially with AAA studios like Ubisoft, this needs to be a more polished end product early on. To summarise, if you enjoy Assassin's Creed games, then play Mirage. If you enjoy stealth and parkour systems like they were in some of the traditional games, then play Mirage. If you want an open world RPG experience, then don't play Mirage. And if you're a newcomer to the franchise, then Mirage is a great place to start, however you will probably find a little bit more enjoyment out of some of the other games eventually. Does Mirage deserve all the hate it received at launch though? No, in my opinion it doesn't. I think it is a decent game, and I would recommend it to anyone who enjoys similar games or other games in the franchise. I would be keen to hear your guys' take on Mirage down in the comments below. Do you agree with my thoughts, both positive and negative, or did you have a different spin on some of the things that I've said? Let me know down in the comments below, and if you're interested in more videos like this one, check out some of these other videos on the channel and subscribe for content on all your favourite games. For For those of you who are wondering, I did go back and get all those stupid Enigma treasures. A thoroughly unenjoyable experience, but there weren't too many, so it only took me like 25 minutes with a guide. Okay, have a good day guys, and thanks for watching if you did make it this far in the video.